stories of marriage proposals. I'm not going to tell you the way that I proposed to Claudia because that's pretty boring. I was not a very romantic guy. Wasn't then, pretty much still am not today either. But anyway, marriage proposals, they can be simple or they can be extravagant. They can be cute or they can be serious. They can be creative or they can just be kind of routine. They can be expected or they can kind of come out of the blue. One young woman was sitting at her desk one day at her office working away when Winnie the Pooh walked in. Guy dressed up in this Winnie the Pooh outfit with a great big head, and he walked over to her desk, surprised her, and he got down on his knee and he took the head off, and it was her boyfriend. And he pulled the ring out of his pocket and asked her to be his bride. Or there was a real masculine proposal. Guy had been dating his girlfriend for quite a long time, and she happened to know that in his dresser there was an engagement ring that had been there for like 6 months, and she was just waiting for him to finally pop the question. So one day, he asked her to go out and check out his new deer stand. And so they went out into the woods to his new deer stand, and he said, "Climb up into the deer stand and check it out." And so she climbed up into the deer stand, and when she got into the deer stand, she realized what was happening because there was a beautiful array of roses. And she looked back down to the bottom of the tree, and there was her boyfriend on his knee holding that box with the engagement ring in it, asking her to marry him. Sometimes a marriage proposal takes a group effort. Guy was in the Naval Reserve, and one day he invited his girlfriend to go with him to a changing of the command. She thought that was a strange thing for him to ask her to do, but she decided she'd go along with it, and so she went to this ceremony that was supposed to be a changing of command, and she sat through the whole thing, and she didn't understand most of it. It didn't make any sense why she was there, but at the end of that, whatever it was they were doing that day, the commander turned to her and said to her, "Do you know a young man named Jerry?" And of course she did, because that was her boyfriend. And he said, "Jerry needs some help to ask you something." And so he walked out of the rest of the Naval Reserve guys, got down on his knee in front of her, but couldn't utter a word. And so the rest of his troop said together in unison, "Will you marry him?" And of course she said that she would. Some proposals are somewhat over the top. There's a young man in our church, actually, a number of years ago, who built a gazebo on a hill. And then his girlfriend had no idea that he was doing some kind of construction project, but he finished the gazebo. And then he invited his girlfriend to go with him on a hike. It was snowing. There was, several inches of snow, which is fairly unusual here in this area, but that was true on that particular night. And so they trudged up through the snow to the top of this hill, and lo and behold, there was this brand new gazebo. And she walked into the gazebo, and in the gazebo was a beautiful dinner that was laid out on the table, roses in a vase on the table, music that was playing, romantic music, and there was even a fancy dress that he'd bought for her and had up there for her to put on, and then he asked her to marry him. Or his brother, who somehow got the city of Corvallis to shut down a section of First Street one evening, and he rented a baby grand piano that was in the middle of First Street with somebody playing it, and he arranged a romantic opportunity for him to invite his girlfriend to be his wife. A marriage proposal, it's a thrilling thing. I mean, if you're in a restaurant and you see a young couple sitting somewhere near you in the restaurant and you watch him get up out of his chair and walk over to the woman's chair and get down on his knee, you know what's going to happen. And when she says yes and they kiss, the entire restaurant begins to applaud because it's a thrilling thing to witness a marriage proposal. And even an unromantic groom does his best. He may not be able to do it very well, but he does the best that he can because he wants his girlfriend to know that she is loved, that she is wanted, that she is chosen. And that's exactly what Jesus wants you and me to know when he calls the church his bride. He wants us to know beyond any doubt that we are loved, that we are wanted, that we are chosen. The picture of the bride of the church as the bride of Jesus is a picture drawn several times in the Bible. John chapter 3, John the Baptist refers to the faithful with that image. He said, the bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. John was saying that he, John the Baptist, was the friend of the bridegroom. And of course, that meant the bridegroom was Jesus. And all of those who choose to follow Jesus, the church, that's his bride. The Apostle Paul used the image when he wrote in 2 Corinthians, I promised you to one husband, to Christ, that I might present you to him as a pure virgin. The church is the virgin bride of Jesus, and Jesus is the bridegroom. To the Ephesians, Paul said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. There are some instructions that we can learn about marriage from that passage in Ephesians 5, but the primary reason that Paul talked about marriage in that context was in order to emphasize to us that we, the church, is the bride of Jesus, and Jesus is our loving groom. In the book of Revelation, the picture is taken a step further. Revelation chapter 19, John, when he hears the great multitude in heaven and they're shouting, let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. There will come a day in eternity when we will enjoy a marriage feast with our groom, Jesus. And we'll be the guests of honor, for we are his bride. Now, there are several privileges and responsibilities of the church as the bride of Jesus that I want us to think about this morning. The first one is that the bride accepts the proposal of the groom. That's how she becomes a bride. She accepts the proposal of the groom. Now, it's true, in ancient days, the days of Jesus, and even before that, most marriages in Israel were arranged. So the father of the bride would make an agreement, a contract with the groom to give his daughter to her. But now, this was especially true in good families, kind families. The father wouldn't finalize the arrangements until he had the agreement of the daughter to become the bride. And so you remember in the Old Testament, Abraham wanted to get a bride for his son Isaac, but he didn't want to choose a bride from among the people of Canaan. He wanted to choose a bride that would come out of his own family. And so he sent his servant back to Haran, where his family lived, in order to get a bride for Isaac from his relatives, from his clan. And the servant got back there to Haran, and he found Rebekah. And he knew that Rebekah was the woman that God would have him make an arrangement for to become the bride of Isaac. And so he talked to Rebekah's father in order to make the arrangement, to settle the contract so that Rebekah could become Isaac's wife. But the scripture says that before the servant was allowed to take Rebekah back to the land of Canaan in order to become Isaac's wife, the family asked her if it would be okay. It says in Genesis 24, verses 57 and 58, let's call the girl and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and they asked her, will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they asked for the agreement of Rebekah before she became the bride of Isaac. Now, the Lord will never force you, nor will he force anyone else to be his bride. Now, he's made a proposal. In fact, for most of us, he has to make multiple proposals before we finally agree to become his bride. It's kind of like the way it was for Claudia and me. She finally said yes after the third proposal. And you have to be persistent sometimes to get the bride that you want. And Jesus is persistent with us. He makes the proposal to us over and over again until we finally say yes. But Jesus will never force us to accept his offer. That's simply not God's way, and it never has been God's way. In the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, book of Deuteronomy, when Moses was near the end of his life, he offered the choice that God was putting before the people of Israel. He said, I have set before you life and death. And then he said to the people of Israel, now you choose life. It was their choice. Joshua, near the end of his life, he said to the people of Israel, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves whom you will serve. Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. There's a decision point that we come to. We have to be willing to come after him. We have to be willing to deny ourselves, willing to take up our cross, willing to follow him. In Revelation, God makes it clear through John, whoever is thirsty, he says, let him come. Whoever wishes, let him take the free gift of the water of life. If you don't want it, God's not going to force you to take it. If you don't want to be his bride, God's not going to force you to enter into that relationship with him. He will bow the knee, and he does. Bow the knee and make the proposal to each one of us. But we get to choose whether we say yes or whether we say no. Secondly, the bride gathers her trousseau. Now, in ancient marriages, the groom is the one that always had to pay something. It's called the bride price. And so he would accumulate stuff, cows or sheep or something valuable, to give to the father of the bride, the family of the bride, in order to gain the contract rights to make that woman his wife. And sometimes he paid a great deal in order to get the wife that he wanted to get. But it wasn't just the groom that accumulated things for the wedding. The bride also accumulated resources in preparation for her wedding, something called the trousseau. The bride would accumulate everything that she would need to set up housekeeping. So if we think in our day, she'd be accumulating pots and pans and silverware and sheets and pillowcases and all the things that she might need in order to be able to set up a household for herself and for her husband and for the children that would eventually come into their family. And the bride would also learn the things that she needed to learn in order to be the kind of wife that she wanted to be for the young man for whom she would become his wife. And then usually it was her mother and the other women of the family who would teach her those things. And they would use that betrothal period between the time when the contract is made and the actual wedding occurs, that betrothal period. The mother and the other women of the family, they would teach the young girl how to cook and how to sew and how to clean and how to do the other things that are required or were required of a young wife in that day and age. And there is a sense, absolutely a sense, in which we bring nothing into the eternal kingdom, that everything is provided by God and we provide nothing for ourselves. And that's absolutely true. But there's also a sense in which we must prepare ourselves for the responsibilities that will be ours in the eternal kingdom. So Jesus told a parable. It's in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. It's the parable of the talents. In this particular parable, the master was going on a journey, and so he gave those servants of his sums of money, talents they're called, to take care of and to use while he was gone. To one servant he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2 talents, and to one he gave just 1 talent. And when he returned and called his servants to give an accounting, he discovered that the servant who had 5 talents had gained 5 more. And he said to that servant, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. And the same thing was true of the servant to whom he'd given 2 talents. He'd also made 2 more talents with those talents, and the master said the same thing to him. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a few things, now I'll put you in charge of many things. The third servant, who had just 1 talent, didn't do anything with it. And to him, the master said, you wicked and lazy servant. Hadn't done anything. that he wanted him to do while he was gone. Now, the point of the parable, at least one of the points, is that there are preparations that we're to make during the period when the master is away. And that's the period that we're living in now. There are preparations that we're to make during that period in order to prepare ourselves for the responsibilities that he wants us to fulfill in the eternal kingdom. We're to prepare ourselves to become his wife in the eternal kingdom. Thirdly, the bride makes herself beautiful for the groom. Now, that's not hard for us to imagine. If you've been around a wedding, you know what young women go through in order to get themselves ready for the wedding day. They go usually with their mother and maybe their sisters or some friends shopping over and over and over and over and over and over again until they finally find just the dress that creates just the look that they want to have on their wedding day. I remember when my two daughters went through that process, Kristen and Becky, and I fortunately was not required to go shopping with them, but they went shopping over and over and over again. And finally, for both of them, this was true. When they got ready, they picked out 2 or 3 dresses, and then they brought me in. You know why they brought me in? Because the dress they really wanted was over budget. Yeah. And so I was the only one that could give approval for the over-budget dress. And so, of course, the one that they wanted was really beautiful, and the others that they had for me to choose from were really ugly. And so we went over budget. That's just the way it works. And then, she will do everything that she can to make herself look just like she wants to look on that day. She'll choose flowers that somehow highlight the color of her eyes. And then they'll spend hours that day and the day before at a beauty salon getting their hair fixed and their makeup on and fixing other things. I'm not even sure what they're doing in that mysterious place. But they do all these things in order to make themselves just as beautiful as they can for their wedding day. Nothing is left to chance. She wants to present herself as a radiant bride prepared for her husband so that when those doors swing open and the wedding march begins and the groom turns around and in some situations sees his bride in her wedding dress for the very first time, he knows he's the luckiest man in the world. The bride makes herself beautiful for her husband. Now, the bride of Jesus wants to do the same. We want to make ourselves beautiful as we can for Jesus, who is our groom. But beauty looks different to Jesus than it does to a human groom. God said to Samuel as he prepared to choose a new king when Saul had disqualified himself, he said, "The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Or Paul put it this way in the book of Ephesians. He said, "Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless." Now, in our case, the groom does the work. He's the one who cleanses us by the shedding of his blood. He's the one who purifies us. He's the one who makes us his radiant bride. That's not to say, however, that we don't have a responsibility to participate in that cleansing process. We must cooperate in the work of Jesus to make our lives more and more beautiful to him as we grow and mature in our faith. The Hebrew author challenged us, make every effort to live in peace and be holy. Make every effort to be holy, because without holiness, no one can see the Lord. We make ourselves beautiful for Jesus. Fourthly, the bride is faithful to the groom as she waits for the wedding. Perhaps some of you remember the name of Jennifer Wilbanks. She became known as the runaway bride because 3 days before she was supposed to get married, she ran away and she claimed that she'd been kidnapped because she was ashamed to take responsibility for the fact that she wasn't really ready to marry her fiancé. I found out a little bit of information about Jennifer Wilbanks. She was supposed to get married in April of 2005. And that's when she ran away. She'd been dating this guy for about a year, been engaged for several months. But when the authorities began to investigate what happened, they looked at her telephone and the history of her telephone. And what they discovered was there were love messages on her telephone, not from her fiancé, but from the man that she was supposed to have married 2 years before that. And she saved all those love messages from her first fiancé all the way up to the point where she was almost ready to marry her second fiancé. Well, it doesn't take a brilliant scholar to figure out that she wasn't sure this was the guy for her, that some of her loyalty was still back there with the man that she'd been engaged to before. Jennifer Wilbanks was not faithful, was not loyal to the man that she was going to marry. And our loyalty means a great deal to Jesus. Jesus said, no man can serve two masters. He wants us to sell out totally to him as the one master of our lives. Jesus told the church at Smyrna, be faithful even to the point of death, and I'll give you the crown of life. When John was given a vision of the final war and of Jesus' victory, he wrote in the book of Revelation, they will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be all of his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Jesus is pleased by our loyalty. He is pleased by our faithfulness. He wants a bride who will be faithful to him until the end. And one more thing. The bride loves the groom. Now, I know there may be a number of reasons why a young woman may choose to marry a man. She may choose to marry a man because she sees him as a meal ticket, that she needs a way to support herself and she doesn't think that she can do it on her own. And so she looks for a man who can take care of her and will do that for the rest of her life. Maybe she sees the groom as a way to get away from home. Because for some young women, home isn't a very pleasant place. For some young women, home is painful. Maybe because they ignore her, maybe because they mistreat her, maybe because they abuse her. It can be painful to live at home. And a woman might just be looking for some guy who will come along and rescue her and take her away from that painful place. And there are other less than ideal reasons that we can think of why some women may choose to be a bride. But there's really only one reason why a groom would want a woman to marry him. And that's because he knows that she loves him. And I suppose in the same way, there are a number of reasons why some people choose to follow Jesus Christ. I think for some people, they see Jesus as a meal ticket. Isn't that what Jesus said about the crowd when he fed the 5,000? They followed him. The next day, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, you're looking for me not because you saw a miraculous sign, but because I fed you, filled your stomachs. That's all they were looking for. They were looking for somebody to take care of their needs. And some see Jesus only as a path out of problems. I got problems and maybe Jesus can help me. That's why we see so many foxhole conversions. I got a problem, Lord, I'll say anything and do anything if you'll just get me out of this horrible situation that I'm in. And some see Jesus only as fire insurance. They need to be saved from hell. And so they choose to follow Jesus for that reason. Now, I think a person can come to Jesus for any of those reasons, and Jesus will accept us. And Jesus will take us where we are with the attitudes of our heart, and he will move in our lives to work with us and to change us over the rest of our lives. But I will tell you this, there's really only one reason that thrills the heart of Jesus. The heart of Jesus is thrilled when a person chooses to be his bride because we love him. When he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus was quick to answer. He didn't have to think. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Love the Lord your God. That's what God wants. More than anything else from us. He wants us to love him. You remember when Peter denied Jesus 3 times? What a devastating thing that was for Jesus What a devastating thing it was for Peter when he realized what he had done. And later, Jesus came to the Sea of Galilee and Peter was there. And you remember the question, the one question that Jesus asked Peter there by the shore of the Sea of Galilee? He asked that question 3 times. Do you know what that question was? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? That's what Jesus wanted. That's what thrills the heart of Jesus. When we who are his bride love him, he longs for a bride, for a church that's in love with him. You're the bride of Jesus. You have captured God's heart. Have you ever seen the difference that an engagement ring can make in some women's lives? For some women, before they find someone who will choose them, they start shy and unsure of themselves. They don't stand out in the crowd, and it's like they don't really want to. Maybe she doesn't wear makeup, doesn't dress up, ordinary in every way. And then one day that starts to change. You can see it. Her hair changes. The way she dresses changes. She starts to wear makeup. Her voice changes. She speaks with confidence. And what makes the difference? The difference is made by the engagement ring that she wears on her finger. Because some young man has come along and he said to her, I love you. I choose you. I want you. Come and spend the rest of your life with me. And she's changed by his love. And God's love can do the same thing for you and me. Sometimes we feel so common, so ordinary. Insecurities stalk us. Self-doubt plagues us. We're not sure we're worth anything to anyone. And then a proposal comes. A marriage proposal. It comes from a prince. It comes from the king. And all that has changed. You want to hear some beautiful words that I think come from the heart of God to you? Now, they're written by King Solomon and probably meant for one of his many wives. But I think they come from the heart of God and they're meant for you. Listen to these words. You have stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You have stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel from your necklace. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than fine wine, than the fragrance of your perfume, than any spice. You've stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. God is saying to you, I choose you. I want you. I love you. And more than anything else, he simply wants you to love him back. Let's pray. Father God, how astounding it is to be able to contemplate love that comes from your heart and is meant for us. In so many ways, Father, we recognize there is so little that's lovable in our lives and so much that's unlovable. And we are overwhelmed that you have said to each one of us, I choose you. I want you. I love you. Help us, Father, to love you back. Amen. We're going to stand and sing our song of commitment. And if God's working in you in some way, you need to talk with someone or pray with someone, Rodney and I and Jamie and others will be up here. We'd be happy to talk with you, pray with you if you'd like to come.